One of the most common challenges that I see when I work with clients is tight hips. Unfortunately, this seems to be almost a universal experience where our modern lifestyle and our movement patterns put us in a place where we're waking up with low back pain, we struggle to squat down to pick something up from the ground, and we're just restricted in our daily movement. And it also means that we have a higher risk of injury when we go to that yoga class or when we lift those weights or even when we go on a long hike. So in this video, we'll be talking about the top tools that you can use to open your hips so that you can move freely and you can do the activities that you love to do pain-free. I'm Karina. I'm a health and movement coach. Welcome to my channel where we discuss practical ways to elevate our wellness from a mind, body, soul perspective. There are so many benefits to opening up your hips. One is what we just mentioned, doing the activities you love, whether that's yoga, running, hiking, lifting weights, gymnastics, whatever it is for you, totally pain-free. But also when your hips can move freely, you actually get more out of your movement practice when it comes to muscle gains and bone density. And then on an emotional level, as you open up your hips, because they're connected to the root and sacral energies of your emotional body, you start to feel more grounded and more fully expressed. And I have a whole video that talks about the connection between the emotional body and the physical body and how you can work with the physical body to experience more emotional well-being. That's here, and I'll also include a link to that in the description box. So how do we open our hips over the long term? Not just with some quick stretch that we try, which can often do more harm than good because we end up pulling a muscle or having a more serious injury. First, we want to start with creating new postural and movement habits that we're going to do throughout our day multiple times a day, which is going to have much more of an impact in releasing our hips than any one exercise that we just do once a day. And then we'll be talking about some specific stretches that we can do to maintain the mobility in our hips and our pelvis once we've established a baseline. The first postural pattern that we want to form is for all 10 toes to face forward when we're standing and walking. What this does is it prompts us to ground equally between the inner and the outer balls of the feet. One of the most common causes of tight hips that I see is a lack of internal hip rotation. And this is often caused by an overpronation of the foot. What that means is that we're able to ground the outer ball of the foot, but then our toes turn out, so we're not able to ground the inner ball of the foot. And then up the chain, what happens is our knees turn inward and our hips turn inward. So they're in this constant state of internal hip rotation, which means they can't move in and out of rotation freely because they're stuck in one place. That brings us to the next postural pattern that we want to address. Walking with all 10 toes pointed forward is going to go a long way to addressing range of motion restriction in terms of internal and external rotation. But we can also address that rotation directly by seeing if there is one hip that is more externally rotated and more pushed forward than another. This is super common, especially in that right hip, often because of driving, because many people have their right hip shifted forward because they're pressing the right foot into the brake and the gas pedal. So the way to test whether one hip is more externally rotated than the other is to place your fingertips on these bony points just at the front of the hip, just below the belly button and then off to the sides. And then see if one bony portion is pushed a little bit farther forward and maybe a little bit farther outward than the other. And then a way to definitively test whether one hip is more externally rotated than the other, you can perform this simple test. When the shin is moving out, that's showing external rotation, range of motion. When it's turning inward, that's internal rotation. The shin that is able to access more internal rotation, that is turning inward more than turning outward, that's going to be the more externally rotated hip. Then there are a couple of exercises that we can do to address that external rotation on one side. For our first exercise to address external hip rotation, we're going to use a foam roller. You could also use any sort of long stick-like object that you can lean your body into. So we're going to place the foam roller just in front of us, a few inches away from your body. And you're going to, let's start with our right external hip. So let's say we're addressing that. We're going to start with our left toes facing forward. We're going to step our right foot so that it's perpendicular with the left foot. We're going to take our right hand onto the foam roller. Left hand can stay on the hip. And we're going to lean our body forward in towards the foam roller, feeling the stretch in the outer back right hip capsule. Then let's say we're addressing left external hip rotation. We're going to do the same thing on the opposite side. So keeping our right toes facing forward, we're going to step our left foot perpendicular with our right, and we're going to take our left hand, place it on the foam roller, right hand on the hip, leaning into the foam roller, feeling that stretch in the outer back left hip this time. And the second exercise that we can use for hip external rotation is one that a lot of physical therapists will use for good reason because it can be very effective. So we're going to start laying down with our soles of the feet planted on the floor. So say we have a left externally rotated hip. We're going to take our right heel, so opposite heel, and place it to the top of the left thigh, just up towards the kneecap. Both palms facing down on the ground, pressing the right heel into the top of the thigh to create a little pressure there. Then you're going to feel your right hamstrings turn on as that left hip coaxes back so that now both of the hip points are lined up, and then release that. And then you'll just do that 2 more times, pressing and releasing. Now, if you have a right externally rotated hip, you're going to do the opposite side. So right externally rotated hip, left heel onto the top of the right thigh. Press and release. Press and feel the hamstring turn on and release. We're going to continue doing these exercises to maintain alignment between the left and right sides, but then we also want to practice the postural habit of maintaining a neutral pelvis overall. One way to find that alignment is through hips over heels. For this hips over heels alignment exercise, you're going to want a strap. Doesn't have to be a traditional yoga strap. Could be a resistance band like I'm using, or it could even be like the strap to a bathrobe towel, really anything that's long enough that you can loop over your feet and you can bring all the way up to your hips. So we're going to take whatever you have. We're going to take it underneath just the middle arch of the foot here. So it might take a moment to find that, especially if you're using something that's a little bit thicker like I am. And we're going to take our strap and we're going to just bend our elbows so that the strap comes all the way up towards our hips. Now to find hips over heels alignment, we're going to make sure that this strap is lining our ankles up with our hips. So that's really what we're finding. When we say heels, we mean ankles. And you can even just practice bending forward and straightening back up. See how sometimes the tendency is to kind of tuck our tailbone under like this. And now our hips are actually a little bit farther backward from our ankles. So then we want to stack them directly over our ankles. And sometimes also the tendency is to throw our pelvis back like this in an anterior pelvic tilt. In this case, the hips are a little bit farther forward than the heels. So we want to always line this back up, and this strap can be the marker for how we do that and find a neutral pelvis. Another way to find that alignment is through PSIS and ASIS alignment. Our PSIS stands for the posterior superior iliac spine, and those are the little grooves just at our lower back. So just alongside what we call our sacrum, that triangular bone at the low back, we have these little grooves on either side. So we're going to place our thumbs there just for reference. And then we're going to place our fingertips on our ASIS, which stands for the anterior superior iliac spine. So these are these little bony points at the front of the hips. It's where you would naturally place your fingertips if you were placing your hands on your hips. And we're just going to see how well those thumbs and those fingertips line up. So if your pelvis is tilted forward in an anterior pelvic tilt, then the thumbs are going to be a lot higher than the fingertips. And then if you have a habit of tucking your tailbone under, then the thumbs are going to be a little lower than the fingertips. You want to find that alignment where the fingertips and the thumbs more or less line up. And there can be a slight upward angle. We want no more than a 7-degree angle between those frontal hip points up to those little grooves at the low back. So that's our second way that we can find alignment in addition to hips over heels. And once we've found that alignment, whichever way works best for you, we want to practice maintaining that neutral pelvis, not just while standing and walking, but also while sitting. Now, sometimes that can be quite challenging, especially since we have these lovely contraptions called chairs, which kind of force us to tuck our tailbones under and to overflex our hips. In fact, sitting in chairs is one of the most common causes overall of tight hips that is causing us to have these other movement restrictions, toes turned outward, knees and hips turned inward, all of these things. A lot of people have desk jobs where they're sitting in chairs for hours a day, and then maybe they even go home and just sit in a couch, sit some more. One of my favorite examples that shows just how tight our hips can get from prolonged sitting is this. Imagine that you were to flex your elbow like this, so now your bicep is engaged. And imagine that you just stayed like this for hours. How tight would your biceps get? Pretty tight, right? So it's the same thing with your hip flexors. We just don't notice it because we're doing it all the time and we're so used to it. But then when we try to move our hips, we go to a yoga class and we try this, or this, our hips can't move. So we want to do two things. The first is we want to practice sitting with a neutral pelvis. Remember, we talked about how creating those postural patterns is going to be the biggest needle mover because that's what you're doing most of the day. So when we're sitting, even if we're sitting in a chair or a couch, we can still find a neutral pelvis like this. But when you're first starting out, it may be easier to use some sort of support like this half dome here, where your sit bones will go on this side here. You'll place that on the chair or on the couch. You can get this on Amazon pretty easily, and that'll make it a lot easier to sit with a neutral pelvis. And you can also see very easily when your pelvis is tipped forward or backwards because it's moving. And then we also want to spend some time sitting on the ground as well. And we want to be moving around in different positions so that our hips are able to get enough range of motion. And then for those times where we just can't avoid sitting with our tailbone tucked under and our hips overly flexed, like if we're sitting in, say, one of those bucket seats in a car where it's really hard not to tuck your tailbone under, then there is an exercise that we can do to release the hip flexors. Now, this exercise is sometimes called the super couch stretch by Dr. Kelly Starrett. He's a well-known movement expert. And I found this exercise, I've adapted it from him, and it's a great way to release the hip flexors. So we're going to find some wall space. We're going to take a blanket, fold it twice, and put it up against the wall. And then doesn't matter which side we start with because we're going to do both. So let's say we start with our left side. We're going to take our left knee on the ground, and you may want to have a block, a yoga block, or maybe a book or something handy to elevate your foot in case you need it. But for now, we're just going to start with the bottoms of our left toes against the wall. Now, this might be enough to feel some stretch in those left hip flexors. If you take the hands to the ground, maybe that's enough. Maybe you start to elevate your torso upright. But if you want to advance this further, you're not feeling much here, take your hands back to the ground and you're going to flip your toes. So now the top of your foot is against the wall and you're going to bring your left knee a little bit closer to the wall. And then you can stay with the hands on the ground if that's enough. You can also, again, walk your hands up to the top of your right thigh for a little more length here. Now, for me, I'm already starting to feel it here. If you're still not feeling anything, you can take that block or the book or whatever you're using. I find that the lowest setting, if you're using the block, is plenty. And you're going to put your right foot on top of it, elevate that. And then you're going to feel a little bit more intensity here. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Maybe adjust your blanket if it kind of scrunched up like mine did. You're going to put your right knee on the ground and just take this in stages, right? Maybe stay here. Maybe come up over here. Maybe use your block underneath your left foot. Now, to be able to consistently maintain a neutral pelvis, you may also have to release tight hamstrings. This can happen with certain physical activities, like if you're a runner, you're often with your hips overly flexed for prolonged periods of time, or even biking. But also, if you were always in that postural habit of tucking the tailbone under, what happens is that the top part of the hamstrings gets really tight, but also really weak. So then the glutes and the top of the hamstrings kind of get glued together. And then when you try to extend your hips to find that neutral pelvis, you can't find the space between your sit bones, which are the bony parts at the bottom of your hips, and the back of your thighs towards the upper back of your thighs. So to ensure that you can actually find a neutral pelvis, you have the ability to do so when sitting, especially when you're sitting on the ground, we can do this classic hamstring opening exercise. So for this hamstring stretch, you're going to want to use that strap or whatever you were using for that hips over heels exercise. Again, could be that tie to the bathrobe. And we're going to lay reclined on the ground for this one. So first thing we're going to do is make sure that we have a little bit of space underneath our low back. So we're still in that neutral pelvis, even while lying on the ground. Now, from here, we're going to start with, it doesn't matter which
foot we start with, but let's say we start with the right foot. So keep our left foot on the ground for now. We're going to take our strap, and as we bend our right knee in towards the chest, we're going to take our strap and loop it around the middle arch of the right foot. Now, taking care to keep that little space underneath the low back, we're going to start to extend our right leg any amount. Now, maybe you just stay here with a little bend in the knee. That's totally fine. Just continue to press all four corners of your right foot into the strap. And then maybe you start to feel a little more release here in the hamstring, especially up towards the kneecap. Maybe you start to extend the leg. Also using the strength of your quad, you're actually contracting your quad muscles to help with the length in the hamstrings. And you want to, again, make sure there's that neutral pelvis, right? So we're not tucking the tailbone under and then we're kind of cheating and coming all the way over here. We want to make sure this is genuine hamstring length over here. And then same thing on the other side. Bending the left knee in towards the chest, looping the strap around, and just really slowly starting to ease our way into extending the leg.
Whenever we have a movement restriction like tight hips, simply adding in more stretches is not necessarily the answer. We have to address the underlying cause of those tight hips, which is often, as we talked about in this video, to do with foot and hip alignment. And once we've found that alignment, any hip opening exercises that we do will be that much more effective, and we'll be well on our way to moving freely and enjoying experiencing life through a mobile and pain-free body. Now, of course, there is much more to alignment than just the feet, the hips, and the pelvis. So if you want to learn about how to find head to toe alignment so that you can move better in all areas of your body, and you also want to know about the best ways to nutritionally support your bones, your muscles, and your joints, then you can register for our Masterclass for Superhuman-Level Health, which gives you a comprehensive step-by-step plan to experience a more radiant body. The link to that is in the description box. If you found this video valuable, please give it a like and share it with someone else who might resonate. And if you want to learn about more ways to feel amazing in your body and your mind, then feel free to subscribe to this channel. Lots of love, and I'll talk to you soon.